The White Cat, from the Fairy Tales of Madame D'Aulnoy. Once upon a time there was a king who had 3 brave and handsome sons. He feared they might be seized with the desire of reigning before his death. Certain rumors were abroad that they were trying to gain adherents to assist them in depriving him of his kingdom. The king was old, but as vigorous in mind as ever, and had no desire to yield them a position he filled so worthily. He thought, therefore, the best way of living in peace was to divert them by promises he could always escape fulfilling. He summoned them to his closet, and after speaking kindly added, "You will agree with me, my dear children, that my advanced age does not permit me to attend to state affairs so closely as formerly. I fear my subjects may suffer, and wish, therefore, to give one of you my crown. But it is only fair that in return for such a gift, you should seek ways of making my intention of retiring into the country pleasing to me. It seems to me that a clever, pretty, and faithful little dog would be a pleasant companion for me. So without choosing my eldest son, rather than my youngest, I declare that whichever of the 3 brings me the most beautiful dog shall be my heir." The princes were surprised at their father's desire for a little dog, but the 2 youngest thought they could turn it to their advantage, and gladly accepted the commission. The eldest was too timid and too respectful to press his rights. They took leave of the king. He gave them money and jewels, adding that in a year without fail they must return, and on the same day and at the same hour bring him their little dogs. Before their departure, they repaired to a castle about a league from the town. There they brought their most intimate friends, and gave a great feast, at which the 3 brothers swore eternal friendship, that they would conduct the matter in hand without jealousy or annoyance, and that the successful one should share his fortune with the others. At length they set out, deciding that on their return they would meet at the same castle, and go together to the king. They would take no attendants with them, and changed their names in order not to be recognized. Each took a different route. The 2 eldest had many adventures, but I shall only relate those of the youngest. He was handsome, and of a gay and merry disposition. He had a well-shaped head, great stature, regular features, beautiful teeth, and was very skillful in all exercises befitting a prince. He sang pleasantly and played charmingly on the lute and oboe. He could also paint. In short, he was extremely accomplished, and his valor reached almost to rashness. A day scarcely passed that he did not buy dogs, big, little, greyhounds, bulldogs, boarhounds, harriers, spaniels, poodles, lapdogs. As soon as he had a very fine one, he found one still finer, and therefore let the first go, and kept the other. For it would have been impossible to take about with him quite alone 30 or 40,000 dogs, and he did not wish to have gentlemen in waiting, valets or pages in his suite. He was walking on without knowing where he was going, when night, accompanied by thunder and rain, overtook him in a forest where he could no longer see the paths. He took the first road that offered, and after he had walked for a long time, saw a light, and felt sure there was a house near in which he could take shelter till the next day. Guided by the light, he came to the gates of a castle, the most magnificent imaginable. The gate was of gold covered with carbuncles, whose bright and pure brilliancy lighted up all the surroundings. That was the light the prince had seen from afar. The walls were of transparent porcelain painted in many colors, illustrating the history of the fairies from the creation of the world. The famous adventures of Peau d'Ane, of Finette, of Orange Tree, of Gracieuse, of the Sleeping Beauty in the Wood, of green serpent, and 100 others were not omitted. He was delighted to recognize Prince Luton, who was a sort of Scotch uncle. The rain and bad weather prevented him remaining longer in a place where he was getting wet through, and besides, in those places where the light of the carbuncles did not reach, he could not see at all. He returned to the gold door. He saw a stag's foot fastened to a diamond chair. He admired its magnificence, and the security in which the inhabitants of the castle must live, for he said, "What is there to keep thieves from cutting the chain and tearing out the carbuncles? They would be rich forever." He pulled the stag's foot and heard a bell ring, and from its sound judged it to be gold or silver. In an instant the door was opened. He saw a dozen hands in the air, each holding a torch. He was so astonished that he hesitated to enter when he felt other hands pushing him from behind somewhat violently. He walked on very uneasily, and at great risk. He put his hand on his sword hilt. On entering a vestibule encrusted with porphyry and lapis lazuli, he heard 2 enchanting voices singing these words: "Within the bounds this bright place is not to fear and not to flee, save the enchantment of a face, if you would live still fancy-free." He could not imagine that if harm was intended to him later, so kind an invitation should be given now, and feeling himself pushed towards a big coral door that opened as soon as he approached it, he entered a saloon of mother-of-pearl, and then several rooms variously decorated, but so rich in paintings and precious stones that he was as if enchanted. Thousands and thousands of lights hanging from the roof of the room lighted some of the other apartments, which contained just the same lustres, girandoles, and shelves full of wax candles. Indeed, such was the magnificence that it is difficult to believe it possible. After passing through 60 rooms, the hands that were guiding him stopped. He saw a big and commodious armchair approach the fireplace, quite alone. At the same moment the fire was lighted, and the hands, which seemed to him very beautiful, white, small, plump, and well, undressed him, for as I already said, he was wet, and they feared he might take cold. He was presented without seeing anyone, with a shirt beautiful enough for a wedding day, with a dressing gown of some material frosted with gold, embroidered with small emeralds to form monograms. The bodiless hands pushed to a table where everything necessary for the toilet was set out. Nothing could be more magnificent. They combed his hair with a lightness and skill that were delightful. Then they dressed him, but not in his own clothes. They brought others much richer. He silently wondered at all that was taking place, and sometimes could not quite control a certain impulse of fear. When he was powdered, curled, perfumed, adorned, and made more beautiful than Adonis, the hands led him into a hall resplendent with gildings and furniture. Looking round, you saw the histories of the most famous cats. Odelardu hung up by the feet at the Council of Rats, Puss in Boots, Marquis of Carabas, the cat who wrote, the cat who became a woman, the sorcerers who became cats, their nocturnal revels and all their ceremonies. Nothing could be more curious than these pictures. The table was laid for 2, with gold knife, fork, and spoon for each. The sideboard was magnificent, with a number of rock crystal vases and 1,000 precious stones. The prince did not know for whom the 2 covers were intended. He perceived cats taking their places in a little orchestra built on purpose. One held a book in which was written the most extraordinary music imaginable, another a roll of paper with which he beat time, and the rest had small guitars. Suddenly each began to mew in a different key, and to strike the strings of their guitars with their sharp claws. It was the strangest music ever heard. The prince would have thought himself in hell, if the palace had not been too wonderful to give probability to such a thought. But he stuffed his ears and laughed heartily at the different postures and grimaces of the novel musicians. He was thinking over his various adventures since his entrance into the castle, when he saw a little figure no bigger than your arm enter the hall. The little creature was shrouded in a long, black crape veil. The two cats conducting her, they were in mourning, with cloaks and swords at their sides. A numerous procession of cats followed. Some carried rat traps full of rats and other mice in cages. The prince was more astonished than ever. He did not know what to think. The little black figure approached him, and raising her veil, he saw the most beautiful white cat that ever was or ever will be. She looked very young and sad. She began to mew so softly and prettily that it went straight to the heart. She said to the prince, "King's son, you are welcome. My cat-like majesty is glad to see you." "Madam Cat," said the prince, "it is very kind of you to receive me so cordially, but you do not appear an ordinary animal. Your gift of speech and your magnificent castle are strong proofs to the contrary." "King's son," replied the white cat, "I beg you to leave off making me compliments. I am very simple in speech and manner, but I have a kind heart. Come," she continued, "let supper be served and the musicians cease, because the prince does not understand what they say." "Are they singing anything, madam?" he replied. "Certainly," she went on. "We have excellent poets here, and if you stay with us a little while, you will be convinced of it." "It is only necessary to hear you to believe it," said the prince politely. "You seem to be a most rare cat." Supper was brought. The bodiless hands waited at table. First, 2 dishes were put on the tables, one of young pigeons and the other of fat mice. The sight of the one prevented the prince from eating the other, imagining that the same cook had prepared them both. But the little cat, guessing by his expression what was passing in his mind, assured him that his kitchen was separate, and that he might eat what was given him without fear of its being rats or mice. There was no need to repeat it. The prince felt quite sure the beautiful little cat would not deceive him. He was surprised to see that on her paw she wore a miniature. He asked her to show it him, thinking it would be Master Minagilby. He was astonished to see a young man so handsome that it was scarcely credible nature could have formed one like him, and who resembled him so closely that it could not have been possible to paint his portrait better. She sighed, and becoming more melancholy, remained perfectly silent. The prince saw there was something extraordinary beneath. However, fearing to displease or annoy the cat, he dared not ask. He told her all the news he could think of, and found her well informed about the various interests of princes and other things that happened in the world. After supper, White Cat invited her guest to enter a hall containing a stage on which 12 cats and 12 monkeys danced a ballet. The former were dressed as Moors, and the latter as Chinese. Their leaps and capers may easily be imagined, and now and again they exchanged blows with their paws. Thus the evening ended. White Cat bade her guest good night. The hands which had been his guides all along took charge of him again, and led him to an apartment just opposite the one he had seen. It was less magnificent than elegant. It was carpeted with butterflies' wings, whose varied colors formed 1,000 different flowers. There were also very rare birds' feathers, never seen perhaps except in this place. The beds were of gauze, fastened by 1,000 knots of ribbons. There were large mirrors reaching from the ceiling to the floor, and the chased gold frames represented 1,000 little cupids. The prince went to bed in silence, for he could not carry on a conversation with the hands. He did not sleep well and was awakened by a confused noise. The hands took him out of bed and dressed him in hunting costume. He looked out into the courtyard and saw more than 500 cats, some of whom led hounds in the leash. Others sounded the horn. It was a great fete. White Cat was going hunting and wished the prince to join her. The helpful hands gave him a wooden horse, which galloped at full speed and stepped grandly. He made some difficulty about mounting, saying that he was far from being a knight-errant like Don Quixote, but his resistance was of no avail, and he was put on the wooden horse. It had housings and a saddle, of gold and diamond embroidery. White Cat was mounted on the handsomest and finest monkey ever seen. She did not wear her long veil, but a dragoon hat, which lent her such a determined expression that all the mice of the neighborhood were in terror. Never was there a pleasanter hunt. The cats ran quicker than the rabbits and the hares, so that when they caught them, White Cat had the quarry made in front of her, and 1,000 skillful and delightful tricks were done. The birds, too, were scarcely safe, for the cats climbed the trees, and the wonderful monkey carried White Cat even into the eagles' nests, so that she might dispose of the eaglets according to her pleasure. The hunt ended. She blew a horn about a finger's length, but with so loud and clear a sound that it could easily be heard 10 leagues off.